Chair. Dame Cressida, thank you. I want to echo the Chair's thanks for everything you and your officers have been doing to police what has been a very difficult situation in London, and also to echo her best wishes to those injured officers. I think the scenes we saw of injured officers on Whitehall were absolutely appalling. I'd like to continue on the theme of stop and search, if I may. I understand from figures that the Met's use of stop and search has increased a huge amount in the last sort of 6 months or so. I understand that 43,644 searches, I believe, were carried out in May 2020, compared with just over 19,000 in December 2019. I was wondering what was behind that considerable rise and how effective you believe that increase has been in reducing crime.
So when I became Commissioner, violent crime in many categories was really increasing exponentially, particularly knife crime, and you'll remember the stories, knife crime on the streets, and sadly as it was affecting young people. And we had then relatively speaking, compared with now, low levels of stop and search. And it was my view that my officers had, to some extent, either didn't have the time or had lost confidence in using that power, and many others, in the fight against violent crime. And so I have encouraged further use. I've never set a target, I've never said what, I've just further use, but always saying if we're going to do 1% more enforcement operations, we should be doing 1% more engagement, explaining ourselves, bringing people in, letting them see how we do it, helping young people understand their rights and so forth. So twin track approach, but we have ended up with more resources, as you know, and more capacity, and reducing violent crime, I'm glad to say. Really quite substantial reductions, 18% I think one year, 13% last year, and still heading down. And then of course a big plummet during, as the Chair pointed out, during the time of COVID. But coming up to date, and I do believe there is a link. I haven't had rigorous academic research on this, but I am utterly sure there is a link, and I've said so on many occasions. There is a link between the presence of officers on the streets and the level of violent crime, and there's a link between the use of stop and search and the level of violent crime. And you can actually draw a graph in the last few years which pretty much shows exactly that. Now, in the last several weeks, let's take May as the example, we had the twin effect of wanting to be present on the streets, to support the public, to reassure them. You'll remember people were talking about, will there be looting, will there be rioting, will there be all these sorts of things, and wanting to continue to bear down on violent crime and on drug dealers in particular associated with violent crime. We've had a huge increase in the time of COVID in the number of people charged with possession with intent to supply, and we have continued to bear down on violent criminals, street criminals, yes, but also domestic violence. Obviously stop search doesn't lend itself to that, but just to make the point. And we've had less crime to deal with, and so the officers have had more patrolling time, in essence. And we've also had some areas of Met policing which haven't needed people there so much. So, for example, the parliamentary estate, when you weren't here, had less police. The airports have had less police. So we've been able to move people from one type of job onto the streets, and when they have come across people where they feel they have grounds, they have been doing stop and search. I may say that June is lower than May, and I think that reflects the other demands of the protests and slightly increasing crime levels again now. But I think that accounts for the big bulge, if you like, in May. And just to say, overall then, if you took a year to May, that is a 50% increase overall in stop and search. Much smaller in relation to Section 60, and I heard the committee being told, I think, about an explosion in Section 60. That's not true. Over the last year, we've done just 11% more Section 60 searches. And that has resulted in 34,000 people being arrested for a variety of things, 4,000 weapons seized, and a huge range of things, but including stops that have resulted in, there was one which was almost a sort of police officer's instinct that something looks a bit wrong with that car, do a car check, there definitely is, that car wouldn't normally be here, I'll just go and talk to the driver, ends up with a stop and search, £1 million cash. So that's an extreme example, but there's been a lot of good yield. And of course it has a Section 60 in particular can have a deterrent effect. When we announce the Section 60 authority, which we always do, in an area, it tends to say to the gang guys, and for us it's nearly always gangs, there's been a stabbing or 2 stabbings and we authorise a Section 60, it says to them there's going to be a presence of officers, they've got the powers to stop and search. In actual fact, we don't do very high volumes of stop and search usually under the Section 60, but it's a deterrent as well as a crime investigation tool.
Thank you. That was very interesting, and I recall you said that you didn't have a target for stop and search. I just wanted to read you something that a previous witness to this inquiry had said to us. This is Nick Glynn, who's a former police officer himself, and he says, I'm quoting him, "In May there were 44,000 stop and searches in the Metropolitan Police. That is a result of leadership, but the wrong kind of leadership. It is the leadership of David Musker, who is the stop and search lead in the Met Police. He proudly told me that they were aiming for 30,000 stop and searches a month. I asked him what the evidence was for that and why he was aiming for that many. He smiled and said, because we can. They have now exceeded that target. They are on to 44,000 a month. Targets are being introduced by stealth. Maybe you will not find them written down in a policy anywhere, but believe me, they are there. They need to be removed for stop and search because they are damaging communities, are counterproductive and are not effective against crime." I was just wondering if that was a picture you recognised, and also I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to it.
Thank you. I've been very clear, I won't have targets. I won't have targets for the service, and I won't have targets for teams or individuals. And I won't have competition between teams about who's doing more or less. I'm interested in the effect. I'm interested in the reducing violent crime and the positive outcome rates. I'm interested in them using high quality intelligence to focus in the highest crime areas and reduce the crime there, and focus against people that we know are prolific knife carriers, carry weapons, are violent drug dealers. That's what I want them doing. I can't obviously speak for you wouldn't expect me to speak to that comment. I don't know if that was said. What I can say is that Dave Musker, now retired, was the stop search lead and very well-known figure around here as the gold commander for Carnival and goodness knows what other things. My stop search lead now, Jane Connors, some of you will know, you would be, if this is where the question, sort of the underlying bit of the question, you would be hard pushed to find somebody who was more sensitive to the community concerns and community issues, who would be less likely to impose a target. I don't believe my officers have targets. I don't want them to have targets, nor do I, I've said many times, I don't expect stop search to go on going up and up and up and up, even if we carry on growing and have more capacity. I don't think that would be right, and obviously there is a balance here. If 3/4 of the people who are stopped and searched don't have anything on them, there is potentially a cost, for want of a better word, in the community. Now you can deal with that cost by many communities ask us to do more, please. We want you out here, we want you doing stop and search. I don't care if my son gets stopped and searched 10 times because I want him not to be carrying a knife, I want him not to be at risk. But overall, I do understand that it is a power that has both a history in people's minds and sort of psyche in London, and therefore sensitive, and secondly, one which, if you are being stopped and searched and you've got nothing on you, and that happens, more than once in your area, and you're frightened about violent crime, that would be frustrating and worrying.
And you mentioned community relations. I think you said there'd been a 50% increase in stop and search in the last year. What effect have you noticed, if any, on your relationship with communities in London, particularly perhaps black and minority ethnic communities?
Well, I don't know if Helen wants to come in here again. She leads on professionalism and engagement for me, but there's clearly been some concerns raised in the last several weeks. We know that, and I think people are concerned and they are anxious. How are the police working with us? How does this work? why are they doing that? So lots more people are more alert to the issues now. We have tried throughout to engage, and at the same time, and since I was last in front of this committee, I've invested in more schools officers, I've invested in more youth engagement officers, I've invested in more training, not just for my people but for members of the public. I've invested in members of the community who come and watch us do Stop Search. I've done a whole series of things to try to increase people's understanding and increase our sensitivity, if you like. And I do keep an eye on the figures like a hawk to see that, for example, which I can tell you they are, our Stop Search operations are focused in the highest violence areas of the highest violence wards in the highest violence boroughs, and are getting a reasonable kind of yield. But of course, people have expressed concerns over the last, many months and years, actually, on and off about Stop and Search, and I am alert to that. And I, as I said, I'm absolutely up for this moment in time to be a moment where we take a giant leap forward, both in the way we work across the Met as a place that everybody can thrive, we might come to the internal environment, but also in the way we work most effectively for and with our communities, particularly our black communities, how we can involve them more in our work. We've got more black volunteers than we've ever had. We've got more black officers and staff than we've ever had. We've got more black specials and PCSOs. And we've got more volunteers, far more volunteers, black volunteers. So I feel positive about the future. I must be very alert to, London is a place where the Commissioner needs to be alert. It's probably the best way to put it.
Thank you. Our communities are very concerned still about violence levels in their communities and also about on-street drugs markets. And when we hold our listening forums, those are the things that often come through. They obviously have different views on the use of Stop and Search to tackle violence and on-street drugs markets. But by and large, the tactic is mostly supported. Of course, it matters enormously as to how we go about it and how clear we can be that it's a properly intelligence-led intervention. And we need to be really clear about that and be able to demonstrate that to communities. So we have local monitoring groups. We work with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime to make sure that the local monitoring group can pick up on instances that they're concerned about. And I think that's a hugely important openness that we have. That's likely to be strengthened even further. The Mayor is creating an action plan at this point for increasing trust and confidence and accountability for the Met. And the local community monitoring is likely to be strengthened even further. And I think that's really beneficial. The thing that is certainly causing the real anxiety at the moment is the videos, and what is needed, I think, there again is a very fast explanation where we can make it, and confidence that it's going to be properly investigated, and if there's learning to be taken from it, that learning will certainly take place.